CostQuest Associates. You have colleagues here. You had colleagues here for a long time. CostQuest is a huge supporter of the program, but you haven't been here before.
I have not. I promised you I'd be here this year.
Yeah,
here I am. I didn't expect to be speaking, but excited to be here.
We're glad you're here. Welcome.
Great, thank you. And is Mike good back there? Perfect. Hello, everyone. I am Tom Coffey, and as Larry said, here from CostQuest. I have been working here in the telecom space for about 10 years, which I think in this room makes me a newbie. Yes. But yeah, and before that, I was 7 years at Ernst & Young in their valuation and appraisal group. So I've done appraisal and a whole lot of other things here in telecom for a while. So thank you all for staying here to the second to last session. I know we've thinned out a little bit here in the group, but plenty of people online, so appreciate that, and excited to share some words with you and to get going. I am coming here from Honolulu, Hawaii, hence the quasi-aloha shirt I've got on. I was originally not going to wear it, but a few people came up to me, and they always see me on Zoom in the aloha shirts and said, "What's going on?" So I am wearing it today, and my last presentation was all about aloha shirts. I don't have any of that in here, only to say that in Hawaii we call them aloha shirts. I live in Hawaii. I'm not from Hawaii, and that makes me a haole, which some of you may know the term. Sometimes it's used nicely, sometimes it's not, but I take it as a badge of honor here. I have a title here, BEAD, from investment to value, and that had been originally a lot of what I wanted to focus on, but after the discussion yesterday and the discussion about technology and what are we going to do with BEAD, what are the right types of solutions, broadband, fiber. I know we have our fixed wireless folks here. Steve looks like he's gone, but I know he was a big proponent on fixed wireless, and that is a solution. We got people like Elon. They want to do satellite service. So I changed around a little bit and added some of that. Hopefully we've got some discussion here, and people are interested and want to talk through a lot of that. Let me get my slides here. All right, so BEAD. Now, we talked a little bit about that yesterday. I wanted to start off with two maps, and these are not to scale, so no, the entire country is not underserved. These colors come through a little bit in a higher area than they actually are. But first, we have our coverage of underserved and unserved. It looks, just because of the way the area works, it's more in the Northeast, but that's not necessarily the case, but that is where more population is. So we have differences in where people are and the different type of space and distance you've got to cover. And then we have differences in the investment amount. So these dots here, you've got your blue, and that is under $2,500 per BSL. And again, that's like a household or multifamily dwelling. We talked about that a little bit. That's a home, yeah, and some other stuff. If you are in that blue $2,500, that is more of an attractive place to go for a telecom provider, for anyone to make the economics work. If you are red, those prices go up, and they can go up really, really high. So this is what we see is states up here look a lot different than states down here in Texas, California, Dakotas. We have a lot of different dynamics. And that's really going to be one of our themes today. We have a lot of data and a lot of technology, but the dynamic of each state is going to be a little bit different. Each state is running it a little bit different, and each state kind of has to decide how they are going to cover the BEAD and how they're going to run their program. All right, a BEAD update. You can go to this BEAD dashboard link to see where each state is at. We have, all 56 states have submitted their initial proposal. We have 6 states that have started the challenge process, and we have 2 states that have been through the challenge process. One state, Louisiana here, they have received their Volume 2 approval, and they are racing off to the gates here. We heard from Texas yesterday. They have a lot of work, a lot of weekend work, a lot of Saturday work to get through this stuff. All these steps require a lot of discussions, talking, surveys, protests, challenges on locations, and Louisiana has been going through them. Does anyone have a guess at how many staff there are at the Louisiana broadband office? Anybody? Throw a number out? Not you, Mark. You know. 3? Yeah, exactly. Did you know, or is that just a guess? Wow, good job. I don't have a prize for you, but that was very good. And they have one more open position. How have they done this? How have they been through this quick? And they said they've got great staff, and I'm sure they do. Hearing from some of the Texas people today, I definitely know they do, or yesterday. But a big part here is the technology and what we've done on federal funding as compared to prior programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the differences in technology. When I talk about past funding, we'll touch a little bit on RDOF, which was a prior federal funding program for comparison. Some of the type of data and challenge process. So we have a really robust points and challenge process going on there. And also, we see on the technology front, there's a lot more assets and technology innovations that have allowed us to move a lot faster. Surveys, I think we've got some written surveys, and we have digital surveys. It's a lot easier to do digital surveys. That stuff comes in, you don't need, I'm sure the BLS folks over here, how many people were doing hand surveys? I'm sure that's back in the day, that was their entire job. Now you get a Survey Monkey, everything's tabulated, everything's in there. That frees them up to do other stuff, and that's a great thing here. We also have the meetings. A lot of these meetings are over Zoom. We have, I think, hit our, as Larry would say, our inflection point on some of this Zoom. It's accepted. People do it. They're fine with it. We have a lot of attendees here. What is that, 27, or that's the chat? 40 attendees. So everyone here is comfortable with that, and we have met that sort of thing. We also have, what I've got here is consumer demand for high speed. That is another big theme here. What does that have to do with some of the technology and what it means? Well, with demand comes money and revenue, and what we call penetration here in broadband. Having a business case and having a desire for this service is going to make it more attractive for all of our providers here, and they will want to pay for this, hopefully, and that will make it easier for companies to want to invest and get their return. Then I've got some discipline in investing, question mark. For years, we've had zero interest rate policy, money gets thrown around, and a lot of those people are looking into software, 10x returns, that type of thing. Now here we are, higher interest rates, different environments. We like businesses that produce cash. Telecom produces cash, and there's a lot more investors that are thinking about this. I have a friend who works in private debt, and he sent me a note saying, hey, for the first time telecom is popping up on these slides in the infrastructure. And so they know it's coming. We've got PE investors coming in here. We've got joint ventures with folks like AT&T. And so there's a lot of capital that wants to be involved and get some return. And then lastly, some less expensive maintenance. Fiber, a lot cheaper than that copper. And increasingly, we have that software and virtualization of the network. So less and less capital assets. All right, let's talk a little bit here about the maps. This is the RDOF map. We have a map here that was done on the census block level back in 2019. When was RDOF? Thereabouts. Our maps could do no better than the census block. And what that meant was within your little area, if one person was getting high-speed service, which we talked was 25 down and 3 up, you were served. So all you had to do was hit one person in that neighborhood, and that got marked as served. That was maybe not the most accurate, but that's what we were able to do. Also, looking at this map, I don't see a challenge process, and I'm sure there were, but it is not as easy as some of our new maps. And everyone's been talking about the challenge process. Here we are looking at a point level, BSL level by BSL level map. A lot of people did a really great job getting this out. This is not an easy task. Address data is notoriously hard to work with. You don't necessarily know exactly where it is on a map. And we, here at CostQuest, but many, many stakeholders came in and are responsible for getting just the points down and then also helping challenge those points right on this map. You can do a location challenge. You know, is this a real building? Do you actually live here? Is there an availability challenge? So every time you click on a point, you will see what are all of the potential providers, what speed will they give, download, upload, and we have had a very robust challenge. Some might say it's loud. Some people have not always been complimentary about the whole process, but that's part of getting better data. Today, everyone is critical of everything. But I think here it is good because we get to a better spot. My one Hawaii reference here is Aloha Tower. How many of you guys have been to Hawaii? Honolulu, okay. A lot of people here. Have any of you guys been downtown? Not Waikiki, but downtown? No. It's fun, a little bit of rough times. I would not say you're missing much there. But it used to be that the first thing you saw when you came to Hawaii was Aloha Tower. So back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, before we had a lot of commercial air flight, you would come in on a boat and you would land in Aloha Tower, this big tower. Someone would come out, put a lei on you, and say, "Welcome to Hawaii." As you can see, it's fallen a little bit on rougher times just by the broadband service here, and unfortunately, that's where we're at. One thing, I know we talked a little bit about AI and some of those changes here. This stuff has penetrated the location service as well. In fact, there is a field of AI called pose theory, and this was originally developed for people. And when you take a picture of a person, there were AIs that would recognize that as a person. If I'm standing like this in a person-like pose, great, it's easy for the AI to see that I'm a person. But what if I was sitting down and kind of leaning? That's much harder for an AI or anyone. You know, a person can do it, but an AI is not going to see you up like this. And so there was a type of AI called pose theory, which said we can align all these different or different body parts, they can be put in different ways. And for the first time, this was applied to geospatial data for this RDOF. And why did they need to do that? Well, houses can be in different configurations. And also, if you think of satellite data, a lot of times there is trees or other things that are blocking the view. So a house that it wants to see, a house is a rectangle. Well, what if there's a tree over it? It may look a little different. And so they developed this pose application specifically for figuring out some of these locations. And that was one of the passes. Of course, there's been a lot of humans and people going through, entering in their address, figuring out that stuff as well. All right, so we've got the Planning the BEAD program here. As you can see, we got a map of Texas, and this time I've got the legend in here. Each state needs to figure out how they're going to incentivize and also come up with their projects areas, and those are the areas that they're going to try to incentivize and get people to do build-outs. Got a picture of gerrymandering here, which apparently started in the early 1800s. Here we've got it, I don't know, the 60s, the 70s, but this is good gerrymandering. This is trying to figure out what type of project areas you will have to make in order to incentivize the participation of companies and stakeholders to invest in BEAD. You also need to set your extremely high cost threshold, the EHCTs, and these are those very, very expensive areas to reach. I expected, Steve might be here to talk about how great fixed wireless is, and maybe at exactly the amount of capacity that they have in their system. But we should certainly look at that stuff. There is also satellite. And again, we heard some great descriptions about what's going on there and where that makes sense. Elon and SpaceX think it's a great solution. I know that there was, on another federal program, they had $800 million suspended for satellite, and they protested that, appealed it, and that was denied. So we're still trying to figure out, does that make sense? So on these project areas, this is another technology area. We can do clustering. This was a complicated and very computationally intensive type of approach a few years ago, but now we have more and more people who are capable of doing it. I know a lot of the providers here, a lot of the big telecom, they do this kind of stuff all the time. And this helps us get groups. Clustering is just simply saying, hey, we have a bunch of unserved locations. How should we put these together so that we can meet the requirements of BEAD, hit our 80-20. We need to hit a lot of unserved and underserved. An area shouldn't have too many locations that are already served with high speed. That would defeat the purpose. And how can we look at these in not just a geographic area, divide them up here, but look at them in other aspects that are going to be important to BEAD, which you may have socioeconomic. Hey, how can we make sure that we are hitting certain areas if that's a priority? How can we potentially group a bunch of areas that will provide a good return with areas that are going to have a lower penetration here? Environmental, tribal, or like we said, wireless here. And this is really important because, as we'll hit later, you have to incentivize and make sure there is some return, or you are not going to get participation to the extent that you want. All right, so what's that look like in an example? Using a CostQuest tool, OnLook, this is a really great tool. There are others too. You know, a lot of people, a lot of companies have options. We really like ours, but you know, I think corporate, a lot of the providers have their own tools as well. What I did was I went in and I outlined a potential area, and it popped up. How many locations did we hit? I think this was about 200 locations. And how much would they be to invest? So about 2.9 million. This type of investment data and homes passed, that really helps us figure out what it might cost to invest and make that a easier process that's going to take less time in an automated way. But what you can see here is when you do that net present value, you're coming up with minus $700,000. So if you're going to invest $3 million to build this out with fiber, your return ultimately and your net present value is going to be negative. And that is why we need a subsidy here and why BEAD's so important to reaching all of these different locations. And you know what? That net present value assumes a 70% penetration, is my understanding. Stephen, what was the penetration you said yesterday for AT&T? I think you said 39%. Would you expect in some of these rural areas for the number to be higher or lower as you get out to lower? And that's going to make the investments a harder ask. So we have the $42 billion question. How do you structure this? The states want a return on funding. They want to get as many of those BSLs served as they can. The ISPs and anyone bidding wants a return on investment. How do you make sure that you get financial viability of these locations so that you can incentivize bidding and that you can make sure that there is a successful outcome and not a company that's going to make an investment and fold a few weeks later? This is a tough question. I don't think there is a solution that's going to work well for every state. Every state's going to have to come up with their approach and what makes sense with the participants and the people in their program, who is serving them, and what is the objectives of those stakeholders. Big ISPs, they may be very profit motivated, and AT&T, Charter, Comcast, T-Mobile, they have lots of options for where to invest their technologies. They have big networks, and they are very sophisticated in how they invest in order to create return for their stakeholders. That may not be the case for everybody. Municipalities, co-ops, their return may be more focused on the community. For them, the outcome may not be get the absolute highest ROI for their company, but get the ROI for their communities and for their individuals. And that may be where they're focused, and that's good. But if we have them structured in a way that does not give them any return, you're going to create problems and financial difficulties, bankruptcy, outcomes that are going to be counterproductive. So we need to put some guardrails and figure out how can we make sure that we have good outcomes for everybody. And this brings us to the concept of the winner's curse. Have you guys heard of the winner's curse here? Maybe you've done a bidding on eBay, closely related buyer's remorse. Certainly know I have on a few Aloha shirts. If the value of an item is somewhere in the middle and you have lots of bidders who think it's worth different amounts, the person who wins the auction is likely the person who has overestimated the value the most. Because if the value is right here in the middle and most people are right there trying to figure out what it's worth, and they're close, somebody's going to have some numbers or something different, a little bit of potentially it's a bad data, it's a bad analysis. It could even be a different relative value. That person's going to win. And that can be a problem because they may not be able to execute, get a build, or run this broadband to success once they make their build. We see this all the time in financial markets. We also saw this on RDOF, so I just pulled this headline here. RDOF winners default on 78 million in bids. Much more could follow. They thought they would get some return. They'd be able to do some build. That wasn't always the case. I did hear that Charter recently finished an RDOF build in Alabama, and we are now quite a few years later on that. All right, so who are the people who are going to be investing in BEAD? Large companies, a lot of the people here in this room. Small companies, these are the ones who have limited regions and maybe have inferior cable service. They want to overbuild. They want to reach the end of their neighborhoods, hit those people with the high-speed fiber broadband. We also may have public and private partnerships. I know that people like states like California building out their middle mile, and they have working with Frontier to operate that, and that will help them build out the BEAD dollars so that they can connect these local community fibers to the broader middle mile service here. We have municipalities, other types of co-ops, all these types of people who are participating. And then I've got this fourth category, the secondary market. And these players will not necessarily want to participate in the initial funding, but they're going to wait and see what happens. There will be build-outs, and there will be difficulties, success as well, and then they can come in and scoop up these small telecoms. For example, I know we have Gigapower, who is a joint venture between AT&T and Blackstone? BlackRock, right? I always confuse those two. They are investing in these areas. We have a new PE-backed Firelink, P-H-I-R-E, interesting name. The ex-CEO of Lumen and private equity, they recently started. They've made one acquisition, but they said, we're going to make a lot more. And I think they'll be looking at these BEAD targets here. So here we go. Here is the type of question. What we have here is our average locations per square mile and how much does it cost to hit these with broadband. And as you might expect, when you have lots of houses close together, the average cost to reach them is quite low. These people will probably be able to hit them with high fiber. Everyone will want to bid on those. As we get out to the least dense areas, your cost shoots up to $200,000, and I even think we have some outliers that are much higher than that. This is where we think fixed wireless satellite could make the most sense. But each state has to decide what are their extremely high location threshold? Where do they want to draw the line to say, all right, these are going to be hard to reach, going to be expensive, and we need to figure out how we're going to work those. And again, it's going to look different for every state. There is a tool for every piece of data. A few days ago, the wireless internet service providers put together a tool that they said has the optimal ECHT location for BEAD. And what they came up with was 15,627. That is where you should apparently start doing fixed wireless. And that would put 38% of the total BEAD dollars into fixed wireless, or about 3.7 million of the people. What was the T-Mobile fixed wireless capacity? Do you remember the extra capacity in T-Mobile? 7 million, somewhere thereabouts? Yeah, 7 million. Remember who put this together? And I think what we know is that these tools can be useful, but these answers are not going to come from one tool for every state. Let's take a look at one of the states, South Dakota here. 80% of the state is served by these small co-ops and municipal organizations. They call them trusted providers who've handled the location. I have not spent a lot of time in South Dakota. I have not talked to the broadband office there, so here's just what I've read and a little bit of what I heard secondhand. They're thinking about potentially doing an outcome of full fiber. They've got these organizations. That's on the table. That's something that could happen. This tool says 52% of the locations should be fixed wireless. What's the difference here? The difference is the details. And what is going on the ground there? Who are their providers? What is their approach? It's also an interesting question about what is a BSL and what should their plan be. What do you guys think? Should we be providing broadband to a barn and a grain bin? You guys think that should be a valid place that we should have fiber and high-speed internet? Yes? No? Anybody yes? It depends. Yes. Very good. I was trying to give you the gotcha, but you saw right through that. This is going to come down to the states and the communities understanding their businesses, their individuals. Smart ag, if you want a tractor or you want a grain bin that's connected to the internet so it can tell you when we are filling up, when we need to make a change, even automate a machine-to-machine interaction, then that sounds pretty good. Great, but we may, with limited funds, want to start with the person-to-person or actual living space type of location. All right, so that gets us into details of BEAD. And what I call this is the $42 billion check split 1,000 ways. There's a lot of details in here that are going to make this a very complicated program at the federal level, let alone what's going to happen here at our state levels. Even after we go through this whole process, we have complexities around recorded income, and this is one of the type of valuation questions when you get this BEAD funding. That often from an accounting standpoint may look like income, and if we have a centrally assessed state, is that really income when it's going right into the ground? And not only that, it's not earning a return that's going to be the same as an investment that they make. So the BEAD dollars may give zero return, but the dollars invested by the company, that's where they're going to get their return. We have an ownership question. Until the BEAD recipients have met their requirements, the investment may have federal ownership that is transitioning to private. What does that mean for property tax? What does that mean for income for these communities, especially if they are working with a co-op or someone who is not paying property taxes? I think we had a question yesterday. Were they trying to exclude some of these organizations because they weren't paying taxes and we were going to have less income? I don't know, but it is going to be a question that we're going through there. Mismatches in reimbursements. When are the dollars going in? When are they coming out? What is our fair market value? That's going to be a tough question. Then we have our audits, carve-backs, restatements. These are annoying and hard enough to explain here in property tax without any federal intervention, to say nothing of what happens when we have our state rules and our federal grants going on as well. So here are some of the valuation questions here. I have some examples that we may or may not have some time to go through. But the question is, who owns the network? Covered that a little bit. Is it taxable? Depends who owns it. What are the subsidies? Are these intangible, tangible assets? What happens to our legacy networks? We have, in Arizona, a big build-out on the middle mile. So what Arizona realizes, they have 90% of their population lives off the interstate. And so how are they going to help BEAD? They're going to build a middle mile right down the interstate. What does that mean for a provider like Cox, who has run their own middle mile? What does that mean for all these providers, all you guys who have potentially old assets still on the books, not retired, but we now have all these new providers, all these programs coming in? Certainly they're not going to be worth what they were used to. And then finally, we have our fair market value. We are really focused on cost here at CostQuest, but also here in property tax. I know a lot of the assessors, a lot of our consultants, a lot of our corporates, we like looking at costs because it is a very tangible and very real way of thinking about value. We are not necessarily going to be able to do that with BEAD. Fair market value is going to be different from the cost. That's what a subsidy is. It is difference here in what you're investing and what it's actually worth, at least to the company. Now, it may provide a ton of value, bridging the digital divide, helping people get to where they want to go from a community and individual standpoint, but it's not going to be fair market value for these companies. So that's something we're going to have to figure out as we go forward. All right, expect a little more discussion here, but just any questions about BEAD or about anything we've gone through here. Ruben.
Yeah, Tom, can we kind of revisit the $70 a month ARPU, or excuse me, 70% penetration rate with broadband service? Now, where's the basis in that? Because my experience, 40 to 60% is pretty normal. No, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but is 70% a little bit too much of a stretch? It seems to have some impact in how funding is rewarded, especially if you go reverse auction.
Yep.
Whether you're thinking, well, 70% is good, but 80% is better, and you have high expectations, what's the likelihood of actually hitting a 70% mark?
I think we've seen 70%. Our average is if we look at that public 39%, and I think a lot of you guys who are carriers are seeing stuff around there, on average, you're not going to be anywhere near that. So I agree, 70% is probably optimistic. We have heard providers and just people say, hey, I'm not interested. I mean, I think we heard that story from a lot of the rural people. They don't see the reason why they need broadband. I think that'll change a little bit, but I do agree it seems a little bit high for most of our providers, and that's going to make getting a return really challenging, especially on these areas that you are distributed. I mean, even if you build it, the maintenance cost, the more you run, the higher maintenance cost you have, and that's going to be an ongoing. You know, it's not just about putting it in the ground and getting it up and operating. If you don't have that penetration, it's going to be difficult. And one of the aspects here, too, is you need to be able to provide a low-cost solution. So it's just not about penetration. It's also an ARPU question here. If you need to provide a low-cost service, which I think makes sense for a lot of these homes, how are you going to make the economics work? How is that going to change how you bid? And do we want to set up a system that rewards people and awards money for the most rosy forecast? Or do we want to try to be realistic about what is possible? I think that's an open question.
It is. It's troubling because you talk about a competitive bid process, and you know, somebody who bids assuming an 80% take rate is going to, you know, suggest getting a lower grant fund. And if you're in a reverse auction situation, the lowest bidder is going to win. Mm-hmm. But if they can't hit their mark 3 years in, you know, they're going to go bankrupt, and then somebody else has to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that. I mean, there's a lot. This is why a lot of the capital, I think, is waiting to be deployed. And they don't want to be the one who overpays. They may want to be the one who comes in a few years later. If I go back to this slide here, AT&T, they love what's going on in Texas. We all love what's going on in Texas, obviously, but they're waiting. I mean, they are unlikely, I think, I don't have any private information here, to participate in a lot of the BEAD. And what we've seen in other areas, it is the local telcos who come in. If they're concerned with a return for their citizens, if their return is not financial for them, but simply let's get fiber, let's reach these locations, and we're okay if we just get by, then that's great. But if it's so low that they can't even make it work and they're going bankrupt, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think that's why the process is going to favor the large carriers because they've got more experience and they understand, you know, true return and expectations versus someone like a private equity shop coming in and saying, well, yeah, 70%, let's hit that. It's a lot. It's pretty thought-provoking. So
I hope that the private equity shops and any of the financial buyers are sophisticated enough to figure out what a good return is. I mean, there are a lot of people, or some, who have tools that say, all right, here's what the finances look like. I mean, here on ours, you can just draw a map and it will give you a sort of net present value. And you can say, hey, here's what a return might be. Here's what a penetration might be. I grew up in a community that has done a municipality build, and they overlaid fiber, 20,000 people. They have fewer than 1,000 households take it. And I couldn't figure out why. I called up the local broadband office. They came out and they had no answers to any of my questions. They come up and they say, yep, we'll give you broadband only, no television. And my parents are like, my dad's like, hey, how do I watch the Patriots? How do I watch the Red Sox? And the guy who is a Patriots fan and a Red Sox fan, I don't know. You got to figure this out yourself. And he didn't mention YouTube TV. I mean, it would have been great if he just had a sheet that said, hey, this is not, we don't have options, we can't tell you what to do, but why don't you look, here's what YouTube TV costs, here's what other people have done. And so I think it's not only what is the sort of true penetration that a professional would do, but what are you going to get from those buyers who not only don't understand what penetration could be, but what's it going to look like when they're not executing, right? It is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of they're not getting what they could, and they thought it was higher than it was. You're going to have challenges, but I do think there is some light at the end of the tunnel in the sense that people will come in and serve it. You know, we have, fortunately, a capitalist society that will, once it's been built out, the operation costs are not so high that you won't see, hopefully, providers coming in and operating it professionally. It just may have some period where we're going through some restructuring here.
One more question?
Please.
There's something on here. Yeah, okay. She said, it's not a question, it's just like a comment.
Great.
Okay, hold on. It's long, let me prepare. I'm bad at speaking. Okay. Karen says she thinks it's a complex issue, especially as it relates to disenfranchised areas and neighborhoods. The state would have to decide to invest in those areas first to maybe attract new businesses and jobs, and then maybe ISPs would be interested in investing, as there would be a potential for profits for them. People will be able to afford the service, and maybe the area will thrive. More people will move there, which will equal more profits. And then sweeten it for the ISPs with additional credits and property tax breaks. And BEAD-related investment probably shouldn't be assessed the same way for property taxes until it's fully developed. She said just a few thoughts.
Is the community not in a poor socioeconomic condition because of lack of broadband, and is just bringing the broadband there going to be enough? There's sort of that feedback loop. When you get those jobs that maybe pay a little more, are remote, can bring group economics into the community, then you can have a more attractive return for these providers. All right, Larry, I see you eyeing me here. We are up on time here.
Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us. I do have one last question, though.
Please.
You mentioned a number, 15,727 as its threshold. And that was somebody else's number.
That was somebody, a fixed wireless association who came up with this threshold. So take it with that incentive.
Do you have any feeling for whether that's way off or something I kind of carry around in the back of my head? Or
I think it's... Every state's going to be different, and I know that's kind of a flippant response here, but I don't think you can come up with one number and it's going to make sense. But I do think fixed wireless should be a part of the solution.
Good.
I just think it's going to be different for every area.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to be able to applaud with the mic in my hand.
Thank you.